Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Making of Life of Pi. This is a quick synopsis of what I'm going to cover in this presentation. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who I am and how I sort of got introduced to Life of Pi. A little bit about Rhythm and Hues, for those of you who don't know about us. A little bit about our international work. Then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. I'm going to cover the ocean, the island, Meerkat Island, Richard Parker the tiger. I'll take some fun facts, and then we'll conclude with a little making of demo reel. So here, we're already covered my credit list, but I've been a digital supervisor for 5 years. I've been doing visual effects for 14 years, and at Rhythm and Hues for 10 of them. At the very beginning in 2010, I was put on Life of Pi. And it was a very scary honor because we were going to be held to the highest standard on this show. We had to do a lot of different types of effects. We had to do a photoreal tiger that was going to cut with a real tiger. We were going to do 400 shots of oceans and ocean extensions and waves. And we were also going to do a swimming tiger swimming in water, tiger getting sloshed around in a boat, and a whale breach sequence. And we're going to do all of the stuff in stereo. So it was a very scary proposition and very exciting at the same time because I just have a passion for photoreal and for characters, and I love big cats. So it was a match made in heaven. Quick review of Rhythm and Hues. We've won 2 Academy Awards, 1 for Babe, 1 for Golden Compass. The winner of the Academy Award for Golden Compass, Bill Westenhofer, was the same visual effects supervisor on Life of Pi. We were founded in 1987. We just celebrated our 25-year anniversary. And we generally focus on the high-end visual effects and animation. We've done over 140 movies, hundreds of TV shows, tons of other ventures, and we have over 1,350 employees, over 5 different studios across the world. Just quick cover on how we deal with our global production. We have 5 studios. Every single shot in the movie hit at least 1 or 2 of these facilities. So the overall movie was 960 shots, which tells you a little something about this movie. It was a 2-hour movie, 960 shots. So there's some very long shots in this movie. There's some movies that are shorter and have 2,000 shots. There are 690 visual effects shots. 446 of them came to Rhythm and Hues. And here it shows you a distribution of how this is really hours logged more than how many people were in each facility. So 53% of the work was done in Los Angeles. The main reason for that was because our core effects team, the simulators and the effects artists, are in Los Angeles. And there was a lot of effects on the show, a lot of interaction with effects. And then you can see the breakdown of where our other artists work. So I'm going to just give you a quick sample of how it moves through the world. This is one of the shots on Pi. It was a CG tiger, CG ocean extension, and all kinds of other work. This is how it moves through the world. The beachy prep was done in Kuala Lumpur. Tracking was done in Hyderabad. Animation in Mumbai. Water was done in Los Angeles. The tiger was rendered in Cave, which is our render facility in Taiwan. And it was composited in Mumbai. And there are other things like technical animation and all kinds of other things that the shot just travels all over the world. So now, the ocean. We were told from the very beginning that the ocean on the show was to be treated like a character. What did it mean? It means, number one, it's going to be held to the same standard. We had to have real waves based on physics. We had every wave, every motion, the depth, the lighting, every part of the ocean had to be based on physics. And we had to match a lot of real reference that we saw. The other thing was, it was really to echo the mood of the scene. When you watch, those of you who have seen Life of Pi, you'll see that the whole shot encompasses the mood. When he's happy, when he wakes, no, I don't want to say happy because he traveled stuck on the middle of the ocean, but he comes to some realizations. He's happier. He wakes up and you get a beautiful golden flat ocean, and it echoes the mood. It brings you into the thing. So it's not just the actor, it's not just the tiger, it's the whole environment. Ang Lee he's just brilliant at using all of the tools at his disposal to create every frame. And he's made it clear from the beginning that every frame should be a piece of artwork. They knew very early on that there was no way they could shoot this on a real ocean, for obvious reasons. Number one, the camera rig, it's a stereo show, so the camera rig was very heavy. Number two, you can't predict the ocean. So if they needed a calm shot, they'd have to wait eons to find a calm ocean and set it all up and shoot it, and it would just take forever and it wouldn't work. So they built this tank. So this is the tank that they shot everything on. This is in mid-construction. You could see the containers, 4 containers high on the sides. Everything was painted with a blue screen. They had giant silks that came over the top so the DP could mimic any lighting environment he wanted to. They had giant silks that went around the entire container. They had 4 stories high of containers because there were tigers there. They didn't want them running around and escaping. The tank would also have large wave machines that created motion. These wave machines could work in sync or they could work off sync to create different feels of waves. The tank and CG waves had to be seamlessly integrated with each other. Now, we really had to integrate both to each other. It wasn't just a one-way street. The tank, a lot of times we set the look of the water in CG. So since it was a blue tank, you see everything is blue. A lot of times light will go into the water, will create green under the surface. There's a lot of beautiful properties to water. So we would have to take the real water and match that to the CG water. We'd also have to match all kinds of waves in the CG water so that when they got to the edge of the tank, we had to continue them out into the horizon on all sides. The tank itself was 70 meters by 30 meters and 3 meters deep. That depth was also very key to the way this worked because on a 3-meter deep tank, you can only get a certain height of waves. And they were able to get a 12-second period, that's the distance between the 2 waves, and a 4-foot high wave. And that just wasn't good enough for reality, but it was definitely good enough to shoot on. The waves also needed directionality. So they were very worried about the bathtub effect. I'll show you on the next slide what that is. And this was also to be done in stereo. So anybody who's worked with stereoscopic knows waves, water, reflections, tying a CG wave into a real wave, that's just a very difficult proposition. So the bathtub effect. This is what the tank looked like when it was working. This is the bathtub effect. You can see the waves are going all over the place. They're bouncing off the edges. They're bouncing off the back of the tank and coming forward. They're creating chaos. And if you look at the ocean, you'll notice some of the larger waves have a directionality in them. You'll look at it, it goes left to right, but they're just moving off. They're not bouncing around like crazy. And some calmer, smaller, they do, but this is just chaos. So there's no way they could have worked this as a real ocean. So the thing they came up with very early on is they built these giant concrete tetrapods, painted them blue so we could deal with them in post, and they dumped them in the end of the pool. These did a really good job of killing about 90% of the energy from the wave tank. So the waves would just move across and die when they got to the end of the tank. Here's one of the shots. This is a plate from the movie. You can see the waves. There's chaos within the smaller waves, but the larger ones are moving towards the end and dying. There's no recoil off the end of the tank on this. The other thing you notice is we have to take some of these waves and continue them out to infinity, as I mentioned before. So here's what the final shot looked like. It's a little bright from the lights, but... So you can see the waves are extending out. They were moved on into infinity. They were taken over by CG waves, and that's what we did. So the other thing that we needed, as I said before, uncontrolled chaos is not good, but we wanted to control some chaos. So the 4-foot high waves, not good enough. We had MPC did a stormy ocean for the ship sinking sequence. We did right after that was a post-storm, and the waves were still big, and 4 feet was not going to cut it. So we came up with a way to make it look like it was much bigger waves. If you notice just a couple of things, I'm going to play the clip through twice. The first time I play it through, watch the horizon on the right. Compare the ocean extension horizon with the blue screen horizon, or the edge of the blue screen at least. And you'll see how much more motion there is on the final composite. Second time around, you kind of look at the bottom corners, and you see the track camera, which was tracked on the tank with the boat moving, and then you could see the camera takeover on the bottom right. And you'll see what we did to create such a large motion. So in camera space, the boat doesn't move. All of the giant motion is sold on the horizon. So take a look. One more time. Take a look at the two cameras in the bottom corners. As you see, we were able to successfully create a much larger feel to the ocean. On the same lines, I'm just going to mute this one because it's not necessary. On the same lines, we had to add swells. Almost every single shot in the movie had to have a swell added to it. It just takes the tank look out of it. And it's if you watch the left one, you see there's no swell moving through it, and Pi and the boat are moving whatever waves are on the tank. That's great. The one on the right where we added the swell, we had to move the raft, which is what Pi is standing on the end, and the boat independently of each other. So we separated them out, put them through the same pipeline we did, as I showed you before in the previous shot, and you see the wave, the swell wall rolls in, hits Pi first, comes back, hits the boat, lifts the boat, and goes out of frame. So it's a final composite. The other thing to look at in this is the sky. The entire set was blue screen. So high dynamic range imagery captured from it for lighting purposes was not very useful on the set. It was useful in telling us what was there on the set, but it really didn't translate to the final shot. So what we did was we just had to have a variety of skies. We had to replace a lot of the skies, almost the entire movie. So we needed people shooting HDRI. So whenever anybody went on vacation, our producer went home. We had him take pictures. Somebody who lived in Malibu, we sent them home with an HDRI rig for a few days and had them take pictures. We also hired somebody to sit on the beach in Florida and just wait for really cool skies. So, that's the best job you can get in this industry. So they came back with a lot of beautiful skies, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of skies that we filtered through. A recurring theme on the show was no cheating. And you'll see that again when I get to the tiger. We really did not want to paint skies. We wanted to augment real skies. It was very important that everything came out of reality. The motion of the waves, everything had to come from reference or something that came from reality. So we had our matte painting department did definitely paint on it because Ang Lee wanted what he wanted and we couldn't always capture exactly that, so we did augment them. They also had to work in high dynamic range. The camera we shot on had a much higher dynamic range than normal film does. So we also created a pipeline in Photoshop for our matte painters to paint in that high dynamic range. They basically painted in log space instead of linear space. We also had to maintain a huge amount of detail because all of these skies were shot at 16K, and they had to run through the entire system at 16K, and they had to be projected on 360-degree domes. And a lot of times with longer lenses, you're looking at maybe 5% of that entire dome, and that 5%, 10% had to hold up on a 2K final render. Here's a grid of all the HDRIs we actually used on the show. It's 20 down by 19 across, so it's 380 images. And this is just what we didn't throw out. This is only what we used. So out of 446 shots, we used 380 different HDRI. I'm going to quickly cover Meerkat Island. I don't have that much on it, but it plays a pretty important role in the movie. The concept of Meerkat Island was it was a single organism. It was a single tree. Banyan trees tend to have the main tree, and then they'll sprout roots, and then they'll grow other banyan trees, and it'll all be part of the same tree. And that was the concept here, is there was hundreds and hundreds of trees, thousands of roots intertwined with each other, pools of water in with the roots, and we did up to 70,000 meerkats, I think, in the denser shot. We also had to have Pi swimming in the pool, and we had to do it all in stereo. So again, going to the no cheating thing, you can't use matte paintings until you're a certain depth away from camera or it breaks down. You really need to do as true and genuine as possible. So here's a shot. We built an instancing pipeline for the trees. And with the instancing pipeline, we had to build enough variations, but not too many, because the whole point of instancing is you don't have hundreds of variations and have to call all of them in. But we also had to do them, they had to be very generic, because if you have 10 of the same thing in a scene, and there's a mark on there that you can pick out, then the astute viewer is going to just pick out that that's the same tree or the same ground patch or the same root. So it was just a fine balance of enough trees and enough pieces so that you really didn't pick it out. So you can see in the image that the oranges are all the same instance, the greens are all the same instance, the yellows are all the same instance. So the layout department spread it out enough so you wouldn't pick it out. And the final render before meerkats is on the right side. Oh, it's up there. I'm going to play a quick image, making of the Meerkat Island, and then we'll move to the tiger.
I thought the fish had to be coming in from underneath the island, and that the seaweed was absorbing all the salt in the water, killing them.
So you see how much of the plate we replaced. We literally cut Pi out and some of his hot reflections on the water around him, and everything else was redone and replaced in that shot. Richard Parker. This guy was going to be the bread and butter of the show. He had to be absolutely spot on perfect. So from day one, when I was put on the show, first thing I did, I hit the internet, YouTube for every tiger video I could find. I particularly liked the tiger attack videos. Didn't limit myself to the tiger attacks. I went to the lion attacks, everything. It was fun. So I got as much as I could in, and then in 2010, Bill Westenhofer and Eric DeBoer, who was our animation director, traveled to France. And they met the tiger that Ang Lee had picked from Thierry Leportier's place in France. They went to shoot reference and just watched the tigers for a little while and came back. Brought a ton of reference. We immediately started breaking down the reference. Our models at our studio were mostly proprietary, but our models go through Maya. We use Mudbox for displacement, and going back to the ocean for a second. What was the name of that? The water simulation. Naiad. I don't know why I just blanked. But we also use Naiad for a lot of our water simulations. This tiger that they saw would be cutting directly back and forth with the CG tiger. So we knew we had to raise the bar. As you saw in the image a couple slides ago, we had Aslan from Narnia on the left. We had Richard Parker on the right. We knew we had to make it better and improve it. So the couple of things we came up with was we added subsurface to the fur. And that was quite a technical achievement because you can't really do true, genuine subsurface on fur. There's so many polygons and so much detail in there that computers would run out of memory, and it's not good. We also decided to ray trace everything, and we built ray tracing into our fur. The reason for that was Bill made it clear he did not want to use point lights as much as possible. The only time on our show we used point lights was for the sunlight, and that's because it kind of lends itself to it as an infinite light. But the boat was always to be rendered into the tiger, so when he's walking across the orange boat, his white fur is bouncing orange. When he jumps up onto the white tarp, the orange goes away and white makes him brighter from underneath. It was very important that everything in the scene ray traced. When the tiger walks past the hyena, you get bounce from each other. So even with all of that ray tracing and that entire setup, we still needed to maintain a certain amount of control. Our lighters still needed to put their art into it. So we created area lights. We built a pipeline for area lights as well so that they can control those bounces and how much was on there and that. We also knew that our animation had to be absolutely perfectly real. So there was nothing in this movie that wasn't taken from real reference of a tiger. The tiger was on set in Taiwan for 8 weeks. And they went, as I mentioned, they went there to take video of the tiger. But in those 8 weeks, they got tons and tons and tons of reference, doing as much of the action from the movie as they could possibly get. The reason they didn't use a real tiger is because they don't tend to listen to the director. So we got a ton of animation reference. Our animators sat there with reference on their screens. If a tiger didn't make a facial expression, we didn't put it in the movie. So everything had to be based absolutely on reality. As I mentioned before, the realistic fur rendering, and we also did a lot of work on our skin and muscle, which I'll get into in a little bit. So Richard Parker himself. He took about a year to build his base character. We did 5 variations of him. Because I was on a boat for a while, so he didn't have food, so he got skinnier and skinnier through the movie, so there are 5 variations of skinny. So from the first polygon in Maya to the first final was a year. He has 10 million hairs over his body. His render time was about a little over 30 hours per frame, and that's because, those of you in the gaming industry are cringing. That's because it was stereo #1, so it's really just 15 hours a frame. But, it was subsurface, it was ray traced, it had all the bells and whistles on it. So 15 hours is not too bad. We also had very complex skin and muscle simulations. And as I mentioned before, he was not anthropomorphized at all. If it wasn't in reference, it wasn't on the tiger. And same thing for his motions. One other thing that was cool was Terry, who is in France, has his own place there. He actually came to Rhythm and Hues one point, and we sat in the screening room and we were watching animation after animation after animation. It was absolutely fascinating to me to just hear him talking about tigers, and he would look at a shot and he would know a tiger wouldn't do that with a stick in the face. A tiger wouldn't do that. A tiger wouldn't, and it was just, it was just amazing to listen to how knowledgeable and just what the tiger would really do. So that's the standard that we were held to. It's would the tiger do it? If it wouldn't, it's not in the movie. So here's a little bit about the tech animation and the bone structure and the muscle structure and the skin simulations and everything on it. So I'll just see if I can pause it. Oh, or not, actually. So that was the bone structure. That was what we used to simulate all of our skin on top of. So the skin slide on the scapulas, for example, is a very key part of the tiger. The scapulas push up. Skin was all simulated on that. Those were the muscles that the animators... We had 2 layers of muscle animation. One was automatic in tech animation or simulated. The other one we gave animators control so that they can tense muscles and release muscles when they wanted to. Skin simulation comes after that. Then we do the first simulation, and then we have the tigers at the end. And the one on the left is the real tiger. The one on the right is our CG tiger, and that's the CG tiger. So this shot's an interesting one also because this is the very first time Ang Lee saw the CG tiger. And Bill was sitting at his desk in Taiwan while they were shooting on the tank, and he just had this playing on there. And Ang Lee walked behind him, and he looked at his screen and said, "Oh, that's a very nice reference of King." So Bill turned to him and said, "Well, that's not King, that's our CG King." And he just looked and said, "Good job." So for Ang Lee, that's quite a compliment. So this is another test that we did. This was held also to a very, very high standard. This is what we really ran through the ringer for our first simulation. You see all the nice loose skin on the hip of the tiger. He's essentially like a sack of bones and muscles in certain areas, and it just moves through the skin and pushes it around. And his arms are very, very, very powerful. I mean, this is a 500-pound killing machine. So you have to get every little detail. He has to feel powerful, and the muscles are huge on his arms, and they flex, and you can just see this is on the left guy is the real guy, the right guy is our CG guy, and you can see how much detail was put into these simulations. A little more detail on the simulations. You've already seen the muscles. We ran 3 layers of simulation. We ran subcutaneous, dermis, and epidermis. Each one layered another level of detail onto this guy, and it basically built up to where you were. You can just see in the top right corner, there's not that much detail on the hip. Bottom left is the simulation, and you could... stop playing. Anyway, The bottom left, you see the detail, and then the one on the right, you see even more detail. No stone was left unturned on this guy. We needed to get every little detail, even the claw stuff, perfect. So you can see that's the claw rig on the top. And when the claws come out, the whole skin unfolds inside and releases the claw, and then folds back in when he pulls it. His muscles are very pad-like in the paws. When he's walking, they bounce, and they're very thick and puffy. And when he tenses, you can see the bones, and you can see that on the real one on the bottom. And how on the top left, we built our rig to encompass all of those little details. Quick view of the light layers that we came out with out of the render. Again, that famed subsurface on the left. You can see how on like penguins and tigers and any animal that has white fur, there's a lot of light that bounces around inside the white fur, and it softens the white fur out. It can't look the same as the darker fur because there's refraction of light in there that you just don't get. So you see on the next one, the one that's the ray trace diffuse environment, it's very crunchy, the fur. And it looks good, but it's not real. And the reality is we had to add in the subsurface scattering to that to really soften out the white, and the white softens a lot more. The other thing it added was depth. So when the light comes in, it's yellow where the light hits, and then as it gets deeper and deeper, it gets oranger and oranger. So that adds another layer of depth to the sky. So that's the subsurface. We ray trace diffuse the entire environment. Diffuse ray trace the entire environment. The area lights pass. Let's see, that's where on this shot the bounce came up from the orange boat, the rim light, which was our key light, point light, and then some of the specular. Here's what the pipeline looked like to get that done. I'm not going to cover this too much because it's incredibly boring. But it's basically a giant corkscrew. It's a big circular pipeline, because where do you start with? We had a little bit of a chicken and an egg syndrome. You have a tiger that's swishing around in a boat. Do you start with a tiger or do you start with a simulation? Sometimes we started with one, sometimes we started with the other, but most of the time we started with a simulation so that Bill had to buy off on the motion that the water would be before we moved into the tiger. We then handed that over to animation. Animation added the tiger in there, reacted to some of the surface properties, but when the tiger's in there, the water surface is going to change, and the water has to roll over the tiger and hit the tiger, and when the tiger slaps the water, it has to react to him. We also had to make sure that we covered the fur. So when the fur was under the water, it was flowing like fur would, and where fur was above the water, it would stick to the tiger and be specular. And you don't get a specular reflection under the water, so it would have to be dry under and stick and wet over. And so that had to all go through Tech Anima as well. So technical animation, those are the same guys that did the simulations on the skin. So they, the simulation went through, the animation went through, that went through technical animation. They produced a couple of things. I'll show you what was produced by each department in a second. And then they passed that through, and then it just went back and forth, and then animation changed, and we had to do all of it over again. And then finally, they just rendered it all and threw it into the comp. And it worked magically. So here's a few of the passes that got passed down. The top ones are what effects produced for us. The velocity field on the top left was the motion of the water. You could see how nice and flowy it is. They also produced a point attribute that showed what part of the tiger was above the water in green and what was below the water in red. That allowed technical animation on the bottom to simulate the guides. And you could see they switched the colors for some reason, but the green below, you can see it flowing under the water and sticking to the head on top. And the yellow here, it's yellow here because it's longer fur, so it had to hold the water a little bit longer. It couldn't stick immediately. It had to take a little bit longer. And then the bottom right is what was shown to Bill for approval. That's the OpenGL, our OpenGL fur representation before it goes into the 30-hour render. So here's what the final shot looked like. And all of it's lost. So you don't even see all of that work, but it's there. A couple of the other characters we did on Life of Pi. We did, as I mentioned before, we did 70,000 meerkats. There were only about 5 or 6 variations of them. We did OJ the orangutan. The one on the left is the real OJ. The one on the right is our OJ, our render of OJ. As I said, everything was held to the same standard. Right next to each other, we had to make sure that they worked. The zebra on the bottom left, The one behind is the real one. The one in front is our CG one. And the hyena, it's kind of obvious because the real hyena was not over black, but there's the hyena we did. Some statistics from Life of Pi. The fur density on these characters, the zebra was our most dense because number one, it was the biggest. It also had the shortest fur, so it had almost 20 million strands of hair. The tiger had, as I mentioned before, 10 million, a little over 10 million. Hyena had almost 10 million. The meerkat had 1 million because they're quite tiny and they also have very thick fur relative to their size. The orangutan, who's not fully covered in fur, had 640,000. Gamers, again, will cringe. The longest single frame render on the show was 272 hours for one frame. That was the whale breaching sequence. It had jellyfish, it had CG boat, CG pie, CG water, CG splash, CG mist, CG spray, whale. I think I mentioned that. And then the single longest render on our show for a full shot was 1.3 million hours. For those of you who have seen the movie, it's the one where at night, where there's meerkats in the trees and they're kind of falling asleep and standing there, and the camera's panning across the top, and you go down to Pi, and Pi sits up. Part of the reason it was a long 1.3 million hours because it was a long shot. Other reason was because there were tens of meerkats and trees, everything was reflecting in each other, and it just took a long time. Total render hours for the show. These show everything you see on screen. This was not including tests. This was not including simulations. This was not including animation dumps or anything else that we did. This was only the images you see on screen. Was 1,633 years of render time. Of that, effects took 375 of those years. Lighting took 1,000 years. The environment, which is the trees and the island, took 166 of those years. The tiger himself took 248 years to render. Meerkats were 289. Our peak disk space usage, which was almost every megabyte in the studio, was 260 terabytes. And of the movie, 1 hour and 29 minutes of the 2-hour runtime has effects in it. Going to play a short reel, and this would be the conclusion. It's about 2 minutes, so enjoy. That's it.